It's not very often we let our Nuremberg Chronicles out and about, but here they are. I think they're the biggest celebrities in special collections. Good afternoon. On behalf of Special Collections and Archives, welcome to this very special presentation, courtesy of the Library Lecture Series. I'm Tanya Zanish-Belcher, Director of Special Collections, and I'm going to give a short introduction to what you're going to hear about today. You're going to hear from Megan Mulder, our Rare Books Curator, and Craig Fansler, our Preservation Librarian. Special Collections and Archives currently holds nearly 50,000 rare books with strengths in American, Irish, and British authors of the 18th through the 21st centuries, including African American literature, and cultural and social history with particular emphasis on North Carolina history and regional Americana. The collection also supports study in the area of the book arts, including papermaking, marbling, and the history of printing. The collection is developed through limited and strategic purchases from rare book dealers and gifts from donors. We actually hold both of these Nuremberg Chronicles due to the generosity of donors. So why are rare books important? Rare books offer us a way to experience the past, to learn about culture and society and the impact of technology. And in this era of digital, in many ways, we are returning to the objects we can touch, smell, and feel. They offer us something real and tangible. And I would say without a doubt, we have seen an explosion of interest in our rare book collection and our archives just because it's something that people can touch and feel. For our part, the preservation and access of rare books, archives, and documents is one of our most important duties. We work with vendors such as ECS Conservation, also known as Etherington Conservation, located in Greensboro, who did the primary work on one of our Nuremberg Chronicles, and the Northeast Document Conservation Center in Massachusetts. They have trained conservation specialists who are capable of performing treatments on bound materials, including medieval manuscripts on vellum and period decorative volumes. Conservation may include rehousing and custom-designed enclosures, basic stabilization, or complex conservation treatments and rebindings, which is what happened to the Chronicle. The treatment options, which are always shared with us before approval of the treatment, are based on a complete examination of the object, its intended use, and how it will be stored. From a management standpoint, we focus our budget on the volumes with the most value and the highest need. Craig recently completed a folio survey numbering 3,077. Folios are books typically larger than 15 inches, and that will allow us to prioritize the volumes which are sent off and for which we can afford the treatment. Over the next year, we also hope to develop an online Adopt a Book program, which will allow donors to specifically donate for the care and conservation of a book which has special meaning for them. But in the meantime, take a bookmark, follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Flickr, email us with questions, our email is on the bookmark, or come visit us in room 625 where we are happy to share our collections with you and give you a tour. Now on to our wonderful program. Megan is up first. We will take questions after Craig is done, and they will be seated with a microphone. And so we'll get started.
All right, thank you, Tanya. So I would just like to point out before I launch in here that, as Tanya said, we do have our 2 copies of the Nuremberg Chronicle here for you to look at, and please take advantage of that and look at them after the talk. You're welcome to carefully turn the pages and ask any questions that you might have. Also, all the illustrations that I'm going to be showing you on the slides today, unless I've indicated otherwise, they are from our copies of the Nuremberg Chronicle or other books in our collection. So if you want to visit any of these books that you see in person, you are welcome to come to Rare Books and Special Collections and do that. So what is this Nuremberg Chronicle that we're talking about, and why did we select it for the restoration project that we have going on? Let me turn the slide thing on. The Nuremberg Chronicle is not a history of the city of Nuremberg, which a lot of people think it is from the title. The title Nuremberg Chronicle was actually not even the title that the creators of the book gave to it. The title in the book is Liber Chronicarum, which translates roughly to history book, because really distinctive titles were not a big thing for medieval books. So we'll just call it the Nuremberg Chronicle, which is what it's generally known as. What it is a history of the world illustrated with many woodcuts, published in the Bavarian city of Nuremberg in 1493. To To trace the history of the Nuremberg Chronicle, we first need to back up about 50 years and talk about this man, Johannes Gutenberg, who was a goldsmith living in the nearby city of Mainz, Germany. Gutenberg is famous as the father of printing, or the inventor of the printing press. What he actually invented was a way of casting individual type fonts out of lead. Basically these things here, and you can see a type case if you want to see some of these in person. Craig has brought a case of type from his printing press on the table there. These individual letters and symbols and spaces could be arranged and rearranged to print multiple copies of any text. And this one was an invention that all of Europe was clamoring for in the 15th century. The Renaissance had brought the growth of universities, new religious orders, lots of other factors that had created a huge new demand for texts of all kinds. Medieval scribes, like the ones who created this book in our collection, couldn't keep up with this demand. So Gutenberg's method of printing, once it was known, spread quickly, and within 50 years there were printing houses throughout Europe. Since printing had been invented in Mainz, many of the cities of Europe were important printing centers in the 15th century. I'm going to map up here just to kind of orient ourselves. If you see here, here's Mainz, where Gutenberg lived, and here's Nuremberg, right not terribly far away. Books published during this early period, basically 1450-ish to 1500, are called incunabula, and that's a word that comes from the Latin word for cradle. So basically it means books printed during the infancy of printing. The Nuremberg Chronicle is one of the most famous examples of incunabula. This is a page from another one in our collection. This is an astrological treatise printed by another German, Erhard Ratdolt, in 1485. You can see when you study incunabula, you can see that there is a lot of experimentation going on, a lot of technical innovation as craftsmen tested the limits of this new technology. And you can see in this example, Ratdolt is kind of trying to figure out how to incorporate this woodcut diagram into the rest of the actual text of his page. And he's not totally successful at this point, but it's a challenging thing to do. So this is what you see being worked out when you look at different examples of incunabula. The Nuremberg Chronicle, as we'll see, was a big step forward in terms of both book design and printing technology. So that's the prehistory of the Nuremberg Chronicle, but what about the book itself? How and why was this particular large, complicated book created? To answer that question, we need first to go to Nuremberg. And this is a slide of the illustration of the city of Nuremberg from the Nuremberg Chronicle itself. In the 1450s, the city of Nuremberg was a very important commercial and cultural center of the German kingdoms, which made up the bulk of the Holy Roman Empire. As you can see from this illustration, which there are many other cityscapes in the Nuremberg Chronicle, it's kind of a Google Street View circa 1493. The one for Nuremberg, though, is the largest one, which is appropriate since that's where it was made. But you can see it's a very impressive, medieval walled city here. It's got stuff going on outside the city walls. It has two cathedrals, St. Lawrence and St. Sibold, and also a castle up here, which was a favorite residence of the Holy Roman Empire. So it was an important city with a lot going on. There's the Holy Roman Emperor himself with a lot of the kingdoms represented of his empire. So sometime in the 1480s, two prominent Nuremberg businessmen, and I will apologize here that I'm going to butcher a lot of German names, so if there are any native German speakers, my apologies. But their names were Sebald Schreier and his brother-in-law Sebastian Kammermeister. They came up with the idea of publishing a lavishly illustrated history of the world, basically as a way to show off the accomplishments of their city. This is the very decorative, basically the first page of the text of the Chronicle. Printing a really impressive book was a very appropriate way to kind of boost the image of Nuremberg because Germans were especially proud of the fact that printing was a German invention. The Northern Europeans in general had a little bit of an inferiority complex in the Renaissance because the huge emphasis on, classical Greek and Roman civilization. So the Italians were the inheritors of the Roman Empire, whereas the Germans were descended from barbarians. So they liked having, they liked the fact that this new printing was their invention. So it was an appropriate thing, for a German city to publish an impressive book. A book was also good PR for the city because unlike something like a cathedral or a building or statue or something, a book could be widely distributed all over, and people could be impressed by Nuremberg, far away from the city. So to bring this ambitious project to fruition, Schreier and Kammermeister first needed a highly skilled printer. Fortunately, they had one close at hand. Anton Coburger of Nuremberg was probably the largest and most successful printer/publisher in Europe at the time. At this point in the 15th century, the functions of printer and publisher were usually combined into one operation, which was the case with Coburger. Coburger was known for producing fine editions of books, often with complex illustrations and decorations. This is a view of the Nuremberg town square, and this building here on the left is Coburger's printing house. 15th century printing houses varied a lot in size. The smallest ones had just 1 or 2 presses, but the largest ones had 20 or more. And at its height, Coburger's printing operation had 24 presses and employed over 100 people. So it was a very large operation. This slide shows sort of what goes on in a Renaissance printing shop, although I'm sure there was never any printing shop that was ever this clean, but this shows the basic functions. If you look up here on the left, these people standing in front of these large cases full of type are the compositors, and you can see they have up here, if you can see the slide, a little manuscripts kind of tacked up in front of them. They're actually, has the page of text that's being said, and they're pulling the letters and actually setting the text. When they're done with that, they'll give it to these guys over here, who are the pressmen, who ink the type and actually print it onto paper on the press. And then there are a lot of other people in the printing press, assistants and apprentices and people doing various things. So this is what went on in the printing house that printed the Nuremberg Chronicle. And the Nuremberg Chronicle could not have been produced had its backers not had access to Coburger's, equipment and expertise. Over the course of several months in 1493, Coburger printed the Nuremberg Chronicle in what was at the time a very large edition. There were about 1,400 copies of Latin text. It was also translated into German and printed in about 600 copies. For an extra fee, you could have your illustrations professionally painted, hand-painted. This is an example not from our collection. This is from the Boston Athenaeum of a copy of, this is the print of Nuremberg that was hand-colored by a professional artist. You'll see from our slides, and also from, if you look at the copy of ours that was conserved, that our copy also has color illustrations. Those illustrations were definitely not professionally done, as you will be able to tell from looking at them. It was basically used as a coloring book by an eventual owner, or I suspect by the same kid who did these doodles on one of the blank pages. So there was a lot. It's an enticing coloring book. It does make you want to color in some of the pages, and that's what happened to one of ours. So ours it has some color, but is not unfortunately not one of the professionally colored copies. The text of the Nuremberg Chronicle was written by a man named Hartmann Schadel, who was a Nuremberg physician and kind of all-around humanist scholar. I don't have a picture of him, so I'll show a picture of St. Jerome from the Nuremberg Chronicle at work. The text is an example of a medieval universal chronicle that is a history of the world from its beginnings to the present day. This was what we would call like big history, basically. It was a very popular genre for medieval historians. There are lots of examples of this exist. The text of the Nuremberg Chronicle is mostly borrowed, basically, from other sources without attribution. We would call it plagiarism, but this was an accepted practice at the time. So the text was not particularly original, although Schadel added his own commentary. And if I had my notes in the right order. And also some historical and geographical information about European towns with a focus naturally on Germany. What's interesting about the text of the Nuremberg Chronicle is that although it's written by a Renaissance humanist, the content is very medieval. Like many incunabula, you'll see this in a lot of examples, it uses this new cutting-edge technology of printing to put forth ideas and texts that are actually very old and traditional. This is an example. This is one of the most famous illustrations from the Nuremberg Chronicle, and it basically shows a very medieval concept of the cosmos, a Ptolemaic geocentric universe with the Earth in the center, the various fixed spheres around it, which planets and other heavenly bodies move, and then around that, God and the angels. And so it's a very, medieval view of the world. 15 years later, Nicholas Copernicus would, make public his ideas about the heliocentric solar system, but that doesn't make it into the Nuremberg Chronicle. Likewise, the map that's in the Chronicle, even though it's published a year after, Columbus bumped into the Americas, there's no indication of that on this map. Again, this is a very traditional medieval map. It's got Jerusalem basically kind of in the center of the map, and it shows Europe, Asia, and Africa, with the boundaries of Asia and Africa a little bit uncertain. It's got the three sons of Noah here in the corners as the traditional, ancestors of the three races of men. And then here on the left side, it has some other very famous illustrations of what's called the monstrous races. And these are creatures from beyond the known world that supposedly live in undiscovered countries. There's some more illustrations on the previous page, and these get reprinted a lot, so you may have seen these in other places. Most of these legends originated from classical authors, especially Pliny the Elder, but they really took hold in the medieval European imagination and were repeated a lot. And this idea that there were these weird creatures living in undiscovered places was a very medieval notion. Less than 100 years later, Europeans could see illustrations like this from a book published in 1590, which are illustrations of actual inhabitants of North America drawn by a man who had actually visited the New World. But Schädel's text was blissfully unaware of all the major changes that were going to occur in the next century. It tells very traditional stories of biblical figures. Here's Noah hard at work at his ark. Also, figures from classical mythology, ancient history, all of whom look very medieval in their illustrations, and lots of Christian saints. This is Saint Sibbald, who is actually the patron saint of Nuremberg, so he's pictured with his cathedral there. The text also records various other events, natural disasters, weather, astronomical events. Comets were very important. Also, apparently, plagues of locust. And it ends by looking ahead to the Last Judgment. So a very traditional Catholic Christian history of the world. Just in case the Last Judgment occurred later rather than sooner, the Nuremberg Chronicle also provides helpful blank pages for the owner to fill in stuff that happened later. So it anticipates all the needs. The text of the Nuremberg Chronicle has very recently been translated into English. These volumes here are the English translation, if you ever want to read it or even peruse it. These were done, I think, in 2010, and this is actually the first time the text was ever translated into English, which is sort of surprising, but in a way it's not really, because the text, although it's interesting kind of as a historical curiosity, the real lasting significance and legacy of the Nuremberg Chronicle is more in its illustrations and its design. This is another example of the large, city illustrations. This one is Constantinople. There are over 1,800 illustrations in the book, made from about 650 individual woodcuts. Some of the woodcuts are used multiple times, but many of them were created and designed specifically for the Nuremberg Chronicle, which was a process that took over 3 years. The artists in charge of the design were a man named Michael Wohlgemuth and his stepson Wilhelm Pleidenwerf. Their Nuremberg Workshop actually specialized in book illustrations, which is a brand new market, kind of a brand new occupation that had come about because of the rise of printing. One of their claims to fame was that the young Albrecht Dürer had apprenticed with them, and there's speculation that he may have worked on some woodcuts that were eventually used in the Nuremberg Chronicle. His apprenticeship had ended a couple of years before the Nuremberg Chronicle project came about, though, so there's no particular evidence of that. But this is one of the illustrations that gets picked out as looking sort of Dürer-y. So maybe he did, but like I said, there's no actual evidence that he worked on any of them. But Wohlgemuth and Pleidenwerf were highly accomplished artists in their own right, as is obvious from the Nuremberg Chronicle illustrations. Here's another example of a very, very large cityscape woodcut. The Nuremberg Chronicle's woodcuts are larger and more complex than any that had been seen previously in printed books. And in particular, the integration of text and illustrations is way more sophisticated than anything that had been seen before in Cunabula. You can see that in this, in this page, the fact that the really large woodcut is designed to fit kind of around this text. It's balanced. It's a very pleasing kind of design, and you see that in many of the pages. This was hard to do, and they managed to do it really well, which is kind of the really one of the really important aspects about the Nuremberg. The illustrations were widely reproduced almost as soon as they were created, and you still see them, reproduced all the time. In addition to being, impressive feats of artistic and printing skill, they're also a source of information for us about life in late medieval Europe. This is another very famous one by Michael Volgemuth. It's a Dance of Death illustration, which was a very popular motif in medieval art. So that's basically the story about how the Nuremberg Chronicle came to exist. So what's happened to the Nuremberg Chronicle in the past 50 years? Well, when the printing was complete, Hartmann Schadel composed a poem that was used in the advertising flyer, the broadside for the book. This is part of it translated into English, and he expresses, his wish that the book be distributed widely all over the place and float around. And it actually, the copies of the Nuremberg Chronicle did indeed find their way all over Europe, eventually to the Americas. For a 15th century book, a surprisingly large number of copies actually survive today. It helps, of course, that there were a large number of them printed originally, but there are over 800 copies known to exist worldwide in libraries and probably more in private collections, and that's just of the Latin version. ZSR has 2 copies right here. For comparison purposes, for the Gutenberg Bible, there are 48 known copies in the world. For Shakespeare's First Folio, which was published about 130 years later, there are about 230 copies. So the Nuremberg Chronicle is not, a super rare book in terms of copies being scarce, but it's very significant because its history and text, and especially its illustrations, give us a direct link to the people who created it 500 years ago. And the fact that it's profusely illustrated makes it accessible to us in a way, even though maybe the language is a barrier if we don't speak medieval Latin. The fact that it's not extremely rare actually makes it a more valuable teaching tool for us in some ways than some of our rarer books, because we're able to let people interact with it more. When students come to special collections, they can see the book in person, they can turn the pages, they can experience aspects of its materiality that are lost in, digitized versions or facsimiles. And we get all sorts of students visiting special collections, not just Wake Forest students, although we get a lot of them too. This is the first grade class that came a couple of years ago, and they really loved the castles in the Nuremberg Chronicle. They were very excited about that. ZSR's Rare Books collection is a research collection. And, we don't make people look at things behind glass. We allow people to interact with our books. This is central to our mission. But this does mean that we do constantly have to kind of monitor the condition of our books, especially ones that get used a lot, like the Nuremberg Chronicle. And it sometimes means that we have to undertake some major conservation projects in order to keep them in usable condition. So Craig will tell you what we did for one of our copies of the Nuremberg Chronicle.
Friendly crowd, completely relaxed. Everybody doing okay? Ready for the fun? So the conservation work on the Nuremberg Chronicle was done by Matt Johnson, who's the senior book conservator at the Etherington Conservation Center. So I'm going to be basically describing the work that Matt did. And Matt started at Etherington about the same time I started here, so 94-ish, 1994. And he's quite an excellent conservator. He knows his stuff. So it's great to have a colleague like that. So I'm going to just sort of go through a few general questions about why we would do this, and then I'll talk about actually the work that Matt did. So just a few questions. If you have questions along the way, feel free to interrupt. So first question would be, what was wrong with this? Why do we want to repair it? So the volume was basically intact, but had some sort of poor repair issues that had been done before, and sort of caused strain on the volume and sort of aesthetically unappealing kind of thing. So this kind of thing happens a lot, and there's products around such as liquid leather that, you know, come on. Anything with liquid in the title. Liquid gold, liquid leather, not good. So the binding had been damaged by water and oily leather dressings, especially along the spine. The spine was not original, but 18th century, or we're guessing it's 18th century. Additionally, the binding was detaching from the text, so basically the cover was pulling away from the text block. And the text itself had some other issues like water damage, some torn corners, and so on, and also the end bands, sewn end bands were missing. So another question, so what are the challenges that would be faced by a conservator who did this kind of work? So, books from this era generally had good quality materials. This is before synthetic kind of papers and products. They were using basically all natural materials, organic materials. Paper that was used primarily was linen or cotton rag. Doesn't get any better than that. Also, the sewing was probably linen thread, best stuff that we use today. So good quality equipment or materials overall. So the biggest challenges were just repairing sort of the prior work that was done that was liquid, leathery, or you know what I'm saying? Poor choices. So what are the sorry. What are the choices that the conservator would make when he was doing this work, and what would guide his work? So the most important thing is to preserve as much of the original integrity and structure of the book as possible. We want to make sure that the book would have proper functionality and can withstand careful use by users. Conservator uses accepted conservation materials such as Japanese paper, reversible starch paste adhesives, linen thread, and high quality leather. So I'm going to have show and tell throughout. So this is not my bag of Coke. This is rice starch, and this is what you would make paste out of. It's one of the better paste especially for paper. So I just brought this in so you could see. You would mix this with boiling water and make your own paste. So that's some of what was used on the Chronicle. I can pass this around. You can come up later. This is linen thread. You could not break it if you wanted to. It's the best stuff. I've got a little piece sewed up with a needle on the end, so you can sort of see what that looks like. I think I forgot Japanese paper, but it's made from kozo fiber, and it's structurally very sound. It's very thin, and it's widely used in repair of books. I can run get a piece if anybody really wants to see it, but it's great stuff. So that's the materials basically for the boards. Matt used archival binders board. I did bring some of that. And you can see that it's just board. What he did was he laminated two or three of these pieces together and used that for the covers that he made, because he made new covers. Wood. And so basically the reason he didn't make new covers out of wood is because wood is not as stable. Wood tends to warp and respond to humidity. So that's why he laminated this binder's board together. He shaped it so it resembled the original wooden boards. And then this binding was done historically accurately. When I ad lib, I lose my place. So he shaped and laced into the boards the, the cords that you see here. Can you hear me when I'm over here? Okay. So basically, this is the Nuremberg Chronicle with all the. And what he did was he punched an all through each one of the tops of these sewing stations and laced in a piece of hemp cord. So these hemp cords are what he laced into the covers. And then these are pieces of muslin. I bought some muslin. Not everybody's seen it, but I bought some anyway. And he just cut pieces of this. And what this does is this is glued down to the spine to sort of stabilize the spine. And also, he left tabs that extended, which were also glued down to the boards. So the new cover boards have hemp cord laced in through them in all these spots. And also this muslin is glued down to it. So it's pretty firmly attached. Also bought some hemp cord, you can see that. I brought a little piece of vellum. So vellum is basically calf or goat skin with all the hair taken off, and it's pretty thin. I just wanted you to see what this is like. It's sort of like plastic almost. It's very stiff. But what happens over time, this is very responsive to humidity too. So it gets really stiff, it expands, it contracts. So muslin is like just a kinder material to use. Questions so far? It has a neutral pH, so it doesn't have any acidic quality into it. Some of the boards have a buffer material that's added to it to make sure that it doesn't kind of go acidic in the future. So I'm just kind of go through step by step what was done. So the covers were separated from the text block, and the outer sections, front and back, were removed and washed. So when I say the outer sections, what I mean is the first 2 or 3 folded pages in the book were removed, washed, dried, flattened, and then probably every place where there was a sewing station along the edge, so each one of these points is probably torn. There's probably like holes in there. So Matt used Japanese paper to repair those places. So the next thing to help with reattaching the sections and the cover boards, the hemp extensions were added, and then those were like right here where each were. The sections that were removed, washed, flattened, repaired, were reattached, and then sewn around each one of these back onto the book where they would have been. And so that sort of gets them back where they belong, and also sort of helps strengthen each one of these points where the hemp cord came out. Good so far? Okay, you didn't say no. Let's see. So the next step would be let me get something. I forgot to show you this. This is sort of, you can look at this as it has only a single cord. The Nuremberg Chronicle had a double cord here, so there was like 2 cords that went up. And so that's why there was 2 pieces that came up here. So these 2 cords would have been sewn around through each section of the book, around every one. So that's why you get those raised bands on there. But I just wanted you to see what it looks like to have a cord in the sewing. So you can see here, each one of these sections along here has been sewn around a single cord. In the Nuremberg Chronicle, there's a double cord. But it kind of gives you the idea. You can see as well.
this originally would have been done at the printer location.
You know what?
Where it was printed, it was also bound.
No, actually, the binding would have been a completely separate operation.
Okay, so that
So
would
the
have been.
printer would print the sheets and then they would go to the binder who was the thing.
I'll leave this over here. See if anybody wants to see it.
So let me get to the next image. On this one, this shows the extension on the headbands and where the headbands were sewn. One hemp cord was sewn across the head and tail of the book, so the top and the bottom of the book. And you can see there where the sewing goes up and around that hemp cord and then back down into the text block. So basically, the sewing goes, you sort of sew into one of the sections here, you come up, you wrap around this cord, go back down, come back up, wrap around, and that's how headbands originally started. They were very functional, and then later on they kind of became decorative. So there have been like several colors of thread used, and then they became totally decorative, not even functional at all today. They don't serve much of a function as decoration. But this helped solidify the head and tail of the book on the spot.
Craig, can I put you on a line?
No, that'll not.
We're wondering.
Oh, sorry. So the next thing, it's okay to keep going?
Yeah.
For the new cover boards, 2 pieces of the binder's board were laminated and shaped like I described before, and then channels were cut into the boards to allow the cords to be laced in. So the cords were laced in at the head and the tail, and in every sewing station there along the edge. Finally, the boards, So finally, the boards were reattached to the text block using hemp cords and muslin. So the boards were then covered with brown calf leather, and I brought in pretty much an entire skin of leather. You can see what these did. It's pretty much, you can sort of see the animal a little bit. I cut a little bit down here, but this is what a leather skin of leather looks like when you buy one. This is goat. So this is up here with the show and tell section. So after the brown calf leather was attached, end papers were pasted down, and end papers are what basically joins the text block to the cover. So this sheet here is the end paper. It's glued down to the cover right here, and then it's just barely glued down to the text block. So it's just been glued down a little bit along the edge there, but entirely glued down here. This side is called the face down, and this side is called the fly leaf, for obvious reasons. It's flying around. But I just wanted to explain what the end paper was. So the binding was then blind tooled in an appropriate period style. So what is blind tooling? You have a long metal rod with a wooden handle on the end. Tim's got some of it in his office, and you heat those up. And normally it's like a little wheel with a little design on the wheel sometimes, and that's rolled along, and it leaves a little mark
or a little continuous line. In this case, blind tooling means there's no gold foil attached, it's just tools. So, you kind of see the blind tooling. Takes a steady hand, and probably, I've not done anything like this, but probably a lot of reheat. You know, continually reheat. Pretty amazing. So there's also some blind tool decorative sort of medallions on there that Matt put on there. But this is probably close to whatever the similar book published at the same time with the tools. He didn't just make this up. In other words, he sort of used history to inform what he was doing. So once the tooling was done, the new cover was then treated with a mixture of beeswax and nylon. Any questions? We're gonna.
They're going to take a seat and take any questions that you have.
There's also a type cabinet over here that you're welcome to look at. It's got all the type in the individual slots. Also have a composition stick with some type that has been set in it. This is how you set type. You set type in one of these little sticks, and you set type upside down and backwards and set it. So it's not very intuitive, but it works. And this is a chase with some type set into it, so you can see what it looks like. This is how you print it. You have to put it in a little frame like this. And it holds it in there because it's lead, and they'll just fall out if it's not secured.
And this is our other copy of the Nuremberg Chronicle, and if you look at it, it's had its spine repaired at some point, but the covers on this are probably close to original. So if you want to take a look at this can kind of give you an idea of what an original looked like.
Plus it's got some nice design
Yeah, and
on
it's got
it.
some edge design and lots of kind of so you can look at that too, kind of for comparison.
What keeps creatures away from the glue, the beeswax, the lanolin, the arcade craft to do that rice starch with it?
Sure. I mean, just having a clean house, I guess, keeps them away. We have bugs in here sometimes.
Oh yeah, I know we got those.
So
You can't call them bugs and transformers really.
Questions? Right. Were the materials in the 18th century that they used, were they acidic or inferior materials in any way?
sometimes yes, sometimes no. Generally, they were pretty good materials, but there's like some animal glues that were acidic. Generally, like these things are 400 or 500 years old. They're in really good shape. The paper is good. I mean, it's flexible. There was a time period from say 1850 to 1910 or so when they were using all that wood pulp paper that's just falling apart. It's completely brittle because it was super acidic. That's 500 years old, and so they used primarily good materials. There's no liquid leather back then.
They probably they used there was a lot of interesting concoctions, but
Yeah.
it was all natural because they had no choice.
Right.
Kaylee? Yeah.
How was the layout accomplished?
It was, yeah, it was actually.
Keep printing pages till I'm finished with this.
No, it was very meticulously planned, and the Nuremberg Chronicle is also unusual in that we know a whole lot about its planning because all of the documents, like the mock-ups, basically all survive. So there's a book about it right there that you can go to archives in Germany and actually see all of these kind of original sketches that they did, but it was very meticulously planned out. They, every page was sketched out what was going to go where, so that's how it ended up, looking good. Yeah.
I'm interested in the English translation. Is it modern English?
Yeah, yeah, it was.
Include the illustrations and such?
Yeah, if you, it's actually, it's facing, it's English translation in the original and facing pages. So it's actually really very interesting to read because they preserve the structure of the book because the text really is very relevant to the illustrations.
That's not
So
what you
they've
said
preserved
yesterday.
that. What did I say yesterday?
You said it was boring yesterday.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's boring to actually read, but it's interesting, 'cause once that-
You can look at it if you want.
yeah. It took, I think it took about 6 months of actual printing. Once everything was ready, the actual printing took about 6 months.
So would they put each page set up and print several of those at a time?
Yeah, that's kind of a complicated question, but basically, this is a folio book, so that means that there were 4 pages printed on each large sheet of paper. So they would print, all the pages they needed for however many pages they thought they were going to need for how many copies, they would print that page. Most publishing houses, and probably Coburger was one of them, even though he was rather large, didn't have enough type, certainly to set the type for an entire book, certainly not one as large as the Nuremberg Chronicle. So they would have to set the type for one section, print that section, and then distribute the type and reuse it for other sections. So it was again, it was a meticulous process. It had to really be planned out carefully in order to have it work out. Since they printed it in such a large original edition, it didn't get reprinted very quickly. There were plenty, there were enough copies for everybody who wanted it. I think there was a slightly smaller edition published some years later. But there was just, I think there was just the one edition of the main folio edition because they printed a lot of them.
Blocks held up for those original ones. The blocks held up for those
Yeah, I think they did because, I mean, I think they must have been pretty durable because a lot of them were, used for other books too. You can see the same wood blocks in other ones. So, yeah, I don't know what kind of wood they were made out of. I'm sure it's recorded somewhere, but whatever it was very durable. So. Yeah, that was what the artists did, Vollgemut and Pladenwurf, and that was their whole business, was creating the illustrations. Some of them, again, if you look through them, some of them are kind of more generic. They may have been woodcuts that they had already in the shop, but a lot of the ones were designed specifically for this book. So they would have, the process would have been, there would have been an artist, who drew the original picture, and then a woodcutter who would actually cut the block of wood for the printing.
That's really difficult. I mean, there's a lot.
It is. It's incredibly hard. If you've ever tried to do wood cutting, it's really hard. So yeah, it's amazing that they were able to get the level of detail that they did. They were very skilled woodcutters. You see, again, if you look at other incunabula, you see much less skilled wood cutting going on in a lot of books.
I don't know if you noticed it, but on the fold-out page of Nuremberg, on the outside of the wall, there was a food truck.
Well, they had to eat. They had to, turkey legs. What else? I don't remember. It's in the. I know it's recorded what the price was. I mean, they were expensive. This was not a book that you were just going to buy on impulse. This was, it was if coffee tables has existed in the 15th century, it would have been, a large coffee table book. Basically, it was a big impressive gift book. So it wasn't cheap. I don't remember exactly what the price was, but expensive. Yeah. Rich people, basically, people with a lot of money. But yeah, and no doubt a lot of people would buy them for for gifts, for if you had a large personal library, different people would buy their libraries. Of course, don't really exist in the way that we think about them at the time, but yeah, it would have been the sort of book that you might buy to present to someone as a as something like that. So, yeah,
That was a symbol of wealth.
it was. Yeah, yeah. If you had one sitting on it, it was good. Yeah, Phil, did you have?
Another 250 years before it gets rebound, will people then, if their files don't exist in your office, how will they know when it was done and who did it?
It's our files will exist forever. What do you mean? We're archives. No, I mean it's recorded. It's recorded in various places. It's recorded in the catalog metadata, basically that it's been repaired. You know, I don't know. Is it penciled in? Sometimes we do pencil in repaired on this date. I don't know if we have. Craig will do that. Craig will get right on
We
that.
do have the covers. We saved the original copies.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we have the originals. And, yeah.
We're methodical.
Yeah, and we don't. I will just say too, we don't generally go around doing wholesale rebinds. That's kind of an unusual thing to do. We usually preserve the original binding, you know, at all costs. This one we decided to rebind because number one, it wasn't the original binding. It had already been rebound at some point, and it was in very bad condition. And it wasn't, you know, the binding wasn't structurally good enough to basically protect the book, and since it was such a large book, we decided to do an actual rebind. But that is unusual that we would do that to any book. We really don't take original bindings off if we can help it. So the one that actually had conservation done on it was a gift from Charles Babcock from over at Reynolda House. That was part of his library. The other one was acquired at some point, I don't remember exactly when, through, I don't know if the actual book was given, I think it was through funds from the Pascal family that it was purchased. But it was purchased quite a while ago, I think like in the 40s or 50s. Yeah.
Can you estimate, or is there like an insurance?
I knew somebody would ask that, so I looked up. I knew somebody would ask about money. So I looked up actually before we got here, and the last one the last price that I could find, the asking price for one that came up at auction was $35,000. Which is expensive, but again, as rare books go, there are much more expensive books, so it's, you know, it's comparatively affordable for as incunabula go. Yeah, you can grab two. Why not? It's like, yeah, Kyle.
How would a full-scale rebinding affect the value? Would it be preferable to have the original cover?
It would definitely, yeah. I mean, yeah. So for a book, again, like I said, for a book of this age, there's no you're talking about a contemporary binding because there was no edition binding. You know, there's no like, this is the binding that this edition had. You would buy a stack of paper and then you would take it to your binder. So every edition has a slightly different binding. It's of course better to have a binding that is as contemporary with the book as you can get. So that would be better. Again, the fact that the binding that was on this copy was already not contemporary with the book was what made us decide to do it. So swapping out, you know, a structurally more sound 21st century binding for a falling apart 18th century binding probably doesn't affect the value of the book at all, the monetary value. It is, like I said, you can see the spine has been repaired because that's what always goes on old leather books. It's the the hinge that gets opened and closes. That's going to fail eventually in any leather book, basically. So that has been repaired on the other copy, but the boards, the actual covers, are probably fairly contemporary with the book. They're probably 15th, early 16th century, from what we can tell. Yeah.
So you said these are printed on paper, right?
Yes.
So was the shift away from Vellum, did that happen at the same time as the shift away?
Yes. The short answer, yeah. Yeah, because it's very hard to print on Vellum. And also Vellum is super expensive. So, you know, whatever cost savings you get from doing printing as opposed to manuscript are lost if you have to kill, 500 sheep. And really, there's an estimate of how many sheep it took to make, a large Bible, and it's basically an entire herd of sheep. So Vellum is, it's durable, it's great, but it's extremely expensive. So the fact that paper had also, come into Europe was nearly as important as the movable type in terms of being able to print lots of books at cost. So paper at this point is going to be linen rag paper. So again, very good quality paper because they didn't know how to make bad quality paper. But yeah, it's paper. Now, you do find some. We do have a few, early books printed on vellum, but that's not a very easy thing to do. So yeah.
I am curious about where Craig got that goat skin.
You don't want to. You don't ask questions.
Talus. You ever heard of Talus? It's a supply company in New York. Yeah. Oasis goat skin. quality. It's great. I was looking for the, I must have cut off, they all have a little stamp on the back. Anyway, take my word for it. Let's go.
Well, I will.
He
Yeah.
can set you up with a goat skin if you need.
Come down and really examine it if you want to. This. I'm telling you. Good stuff.
Maybe you revealed too much.
Maybe.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Those 15th century dust jackets are really worth a lot of money. So it's like right. Well, that was just a map of Germany, but yeah, the printing had spread to Germany, right, and Italy. Well, it was, I mean, pretty much immediately. There were commercially successful printers. There was a lot of, especially in the first probably century after Gutenberg, there was a lot of kind of ups and downs in the printing industry. Like any new industry, there was kind of a, when it first came to be, there was this huge rush where everybody wanted to get into this new industry, and then the bubble kind of burst around the 1470s, and then they kind of, consolidated. So there was a lot of kind of up and down. But it commercially took off pretty much right away because, like I said, there was this huge waiting market. They had been, trying to develop a way to reproduce text quickly for many, many years, and so there was a market ready made once it was possible.
Any other questions?
Well, please come up and look at the books. You are welcome if your hands are clean and if you haven't been eating anything sticky in the last immediate. You are welcome to turn. Don't go to the food truck. Don't lick your fingers. But you're welcome to turn the pages and look at the illustrations. We want you to do that because you can't really appreciate them without seeing them in context. So please come down and take a look, and we'll be happy to answer any questions down here.
And